Earlier on today, Julian Assange was given a kind of pause in the legal process in which he is appealing his potential extradition to the US. The UK courts had initially said that he was going to be extradited to the US. He appealed that, naturally, him and his legal team. And the judges who are in charge of that appeal have kind of said that the US government has to prove that certain things won't happen to Julian Assange if he is sent to the US in order to approve that he would. How much do we know about this story? So Julian Assange founded and is very much, at the very least, the kind of lead figure in WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is a website where, as you would guess from the title of it, maybe whistleblowers in kind of various contexts. They might be people high up in companies that have access to sensitive information. They might be people in politics and government that have access to something. And whistleblowers that feel like they have got information which is being withheld from the public, which they think should be public and people should have access to, can leak that information to the world. The idea was that even WikiLeaks wouldn't know who had leaked stuff to WikiLeaks. But so in 2010, there is this investigation that's going on in Sweden into rape allegations against Julian Assange. And there's a international call goes out, like, if you have Julian Assange, please arrest him and send him to Sweden. And he gets arrested in London, and the assumption is that he is going to be sent to Sweden as part of this investigation into an alleged rape. But instantly at this moment, one of his legal defenses was like, something is up here, and I am worried that this is part of a plan to get me sent to the US, because the US really dislikes him for then. This is prior to the Hillary Clinton emails. So Julian Assange, he kind of appealed the decision that he was going to get extradited to Sweden because he was on bail. He wasn't locked up at this point. I think there's this moment where he disguises himself. Did he give himself a fake limp or something? The apocryphal story, at least, is that he put a rock in his shoe so that he would kind of walk with a bit of a limp, and disguised himself and went to the Ecuadorian embassy, went in and said, I want political asylum, right? I believe that this supposed plan to extradite me to Sweden is actually part of a broader plot to get me to the US, where I'm going to be tried for espionage. Julian Assange lived in the Ecuadorian assembly for 7 years. After a while, the Ecuadorians became more and more pissed off with him because they have this building that they're trying to use as an embassy, and they just have this guy living there, right? I guess for context, if you don't know, embassies in most countries act as though they are the country they are the embassy for. If you are in the French embassy, it's like you are in France. At the very least, government officials from the country for whom that is the embassy can act like that. Generally speaking, police, security services, the army, whatever, from the host country will not enter the embassy. And so he claimed asylum, and that meant that the British police couldn't go into the embassy. It's worth saying he didn't leave of his own free will either. Basically, the Ecuadorians got sick of him and kicked him out, essentially. I'm not sure if it's clear yet whether they pushed him out the door and then the police caught him, or whether the police were invited in. But he got bundled out of the building by many, many, many UK police. And since then, he's been in Belmarsh Prison, which is Category A men's prison in Thamesmead. Prison is used for high-profile cases, particularly those concerning national security. It's been called Britain's Guantanamo Bay due to the long-term detention of terrorism suspects without charge. It's worth saying that the alleged rape incident, the investigation into that in Sweden, that's kind of now just faded. That investigation, which, it's worth saying, the way these things go, doesn't necessarily mean there was nothing to the allegations, but that investigation got dropped at the very least. But the fact that that has been dropped has had no impact on the fact that he is now in a UK prison being considered for extradition to the US. So one of the key arguments, I'm fairly sure there was like maybe 9, I think, reasons they gave of going like, you cannot extradite him to the US because he's at risk of all these different things of like torture, the death penalty, etc. But particularly the one that is going to, the big one it's going to rest on is there a risk that Julian Assange gets extradited to the US and is given the death penalty there? And so like the big update from today is that the courts have decided to pause the court case, essentially to seek reassurances from the US that those things would not happen, so that he won't face the death penalty, he won't be tortured, won't be just indefinitely detained, despite the fact that, you know, he's essentially being indefinitely detained in the UK at the moment. As we've said, he is said to be incredibly ill, and I think the question over like what he's being charged with is one of the really complex matters as well, in the sense that Chelsea Manning was in prison for a long time, was in solitary confinement for an amount of time which was deeply inhumane. However much you think she was right to release the information that she did, however much you think detaining her in the way she was detained is wrong, you can see the logic that there is a crime that has been committed there, even if you disagree with it, if that makes sense. Julian Assange, by contrast, has published the information, which is like a different thing. He did not leak the information. He's Australian. It's not treason. But this whole story is one of those which, if the attempt to extradite Assange is successful, part of the reason that the US will be able to have done so without more public outcry than there might have been previously is partly just how long it's taken. It really is one of those where if you sort of like watch the media, if you're a bit of a media watcher, like someone who like pays attention to like how the media works and likes to think critically about these sort of things, one of the first things you notice is that idea of like a media cycle, right? Where something is presented as the most important thing ever on Monday, and by Thursday, the media circus has moved on to something new. Back when those first leaks were made, if Julian Assange had been arrested and shipped to the US a month after that, the US might have been successful in doing that, but there would have been political outcry from other political leaders, and there would have been at least some degree of public outcry. At that point, the US and the UK was in the middle of a war in Iraq, and there are a lot of people that totally would have been like, no, this person should be in prison because we're at war and he is doing things that are like putting our troops in danger, etc. But there at least would have been a public debate about it. It has simply taken so long that if the US is successful, part of the reason they're going to be able to do so without more of a public outrage, certainly political outrage from other countries, it's just that it's taken so long and therefore been the kind of thing that, you know, it gets reported on. It's not the case that it doesn't get reported on, but for which it's not going to be front page. Unfortunately, one of the things I would disagree with Julian Assange on is that he has this really idealistic view of how politics works, in terms of having this belief that if you reveal bad actors and bad actions, then political change will come from that. And what we've seen is that that might not be the case. And in fact, the change that might come from it is just that he ends up in a not great place in the US.